That's a restricted area, ma'am. Are you lost? Or just looking for attention? The crowd of young, uniformed soldiers snickered. The woman, dressed in a simple gray windbreaker and practical hiking pants that had seen better days, didn't so much as flinch at the captain's condescending tone. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, remained fixed on the flurry of activity across the desert training ground, her posture one of unnerving calm amidst the controlled chaos. The captain, whose name tag read Evans, took her silence as a sign of weakness, a confirmation of his own snap judgment. He saw a middle-aged civilian, probably some bureaucrat or a lost family member on a tour, who had wandered where she didn't belong. He snatched the jacket she had draped over a nearby equipment case, and, with a theatrical sigh of performative frustration, tossed it onto a patch of wet, churned-up mud near a water truck. This is a live-fire exercise, not a senior citizens walking club. Stay behind the lines. The laughter grew louder, a wave of cheap validation for the captain's petty display of authority. She still didn't react. She simply turned her gaze from the distant horizon to the muddy jacket, then back to the captain, her expression utterly unreadable. It was a silence so profound, so absolute. It seemed to absorb the noise around it, a black hole of composure. But when Colonel Miller, the base commander observing the exercise from the command tent's shaded overlook, saw her stance, the way her feet were planted shoulder-width apart, the subtle, almost imperceptible way her head tilted as she processed the tactical layout, a jolt of cold recognition shot through him, a ghost from a past he thought long buried. He didn't see a lost civilian. He saw a posture forged in the crucible of 1,000 command decisions. If you believe that true authority is earned in silence and not announced with a bullhorn, type competence below. This day was far from over, and the real exercise, the one in humility, was only just beginning. The lesson would be brutal, and its classroom was this dusty, windswept expanse of unforgiving earth, where assumptions came to die. The captain, puffed up with the momentary triumph of his public rebuke, turned his back on her, already dismissing her from his mind as he barked orders into his radio, his voice a sharp, grating instrument of self-importance. He was a product of a new era, an officer raised on simulators and metrics, a man who believed leadership was a function of volume and visibility. To him, the woman was an anomaly, a dataset that didn't compute. Her age, her civilian attire, her gender, they were all flags in his internal system, routing her directly to the category of irrelevant. He walked over to a group of specialists huddled around a sophisticated-looking console, their faces illuminated by the green glow of tactical displays. "What's the status on the drone uplink for Objective Griffin?" he demanded, his tone suggesting the delay was a personal affront. The young sergeant at the controls didn't look up. "Still trying to handshake with the satellite, sir. There's some kind of signal degradation. Heavy atmospheric interference from the solar flares they've briefed us on," Evans scoffed. "Interference? We have $1 billion comms suite that's supposed to cut through Armageddon. Make it work, Sergeant." The entire exercise hinges on this drone painting the target for the artillery battalion. No paint, no boom. No boom. And this whole expensive party is a bust. He gestured vaguely toward the woman, who had not moved from her spot. "And keep the tourists out of the operational footprint. This is a battlefield, not a petting zoo." She, meanwhile, continued her silent observation, her gaze sweeping across the camp with a methodical rhythm. She wasn't just looking, she was assessing. She noted the placement of the backup generators, the routing of the primary data cables, the slight sag in the main communications antenna that suggested attention imbalance. She saw the way the wind kicked up dust in a specific pattern, a pattern that spoke of thermal updrafts that could affect a drone's delicate sensor arrays. She saw the nervous energy of the junior enlisted personnel and the false confidence of their commanding officer. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle, and in her mind, the image was becoming terrifyingly clear. She had seen this exact pattern of cascading failures before, in a different desert, a different decade, with stakes that were anything but simulated. The mud on her jacket was a triviality, a meaningless stain. The real stain was the creeping rot of arrogance she saw infecting the very heart of the operation, a cancer of complacency that she herself had spent a lifetime fighting to excise from the ranks. Her silence was not submission. It was the quiet hum of a mind processing countless variables, a mind that had long ago learned that the most important battles are won not with shouting, but with seeing. The crisis, when it finally broke, was not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, chilling error message. On the main screen of the command tent, the drone's video feed, which was supposed to be providing a crystal-clear image of the target zone 10 miles away, dissolved into a blizzard of digital static. A single line of red text blinked ominously. Terminal link failure. Manual override required. A collective groan went through the assembled officers. Captain Evans' face went from ruddy confidence to a pale, clammy mask of panic. "What the hell does that mean, manual override?" he snapped at the comm sergeant. The young man, barely out his teens, was sweating profusely. "Sir, it means the automated targeting solution is offline. The drone can't distinguish the target vehicle from the civilian decoys we've placed in the area. The system, it's a dead stick. We'd have to calculate the firing solution by hand. The implications hung heavy in the hot, dry air. A manual calculation involved cross-referencing atmospheric data, drone telemetry, target speed, and munition ballistics using complex trigonometry, a skill that had been largely replaced by the very automated systems that had just failed. It was a lost art, something their grandfathers might have learned, not a skill required for a generation of soldiers who operated the world's most advanced technology. By hand, Evans repeated, his voice cracking. "Are you kidding me? Who here even knows how to do that? We have 12 minutes until the artillery window closes." The command tent descended into a quiet, desperate panic. Specialists frantically typed commands into their terminals, their efforts yielding nothing but more error messages. The billion-dollar system was a brick. The entire multi-million-dollar training exercise, designed to validate the combat readiness of an entire brigade, was about to fail because of a solar flare and a forgotten skill. The woman in the gray windbreaker watched this unfold from her position just outside the tent. She saw the frantic, unproductive motion. She saw the fear replacing the arrogance in the captain's eyes. She saw the clock on the main display ticking down relentlessly. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the arid air filling her lungs. Then, with a calm that was almost unnerving, she began to walk toward the source of the chaos. Her movements were not rushed. They were efficient, each step placed with an unshakable purpose. She moved through the panicked soldiers like a ship cutting through choppy water, a point of absolute stillness in a sea of turbulence. This was her arena. This was the world she had helped build, and the world she had fought to protect from the very kind of hubris now threatening to bring it to its knees. The mud on her jacket was an afterthought. The mission was everything. The clock showed 10 minutes remaining. The symphony of failure was reaching its crescendo, and she was about to conduct its final, stunning movement. As she approached the command tent's open flap, Captain Evans finally noticed her. His panic momentarily morphed back into irritation. "Ma'am, I told you to stay back," he yelled, his voice strained. "This is a classified operational environment. You need to leave. Now." She didn't stop. She didn't even look at him. Her gaze was locked on the panicked comms sergeant. She walked directly to his station, the young man flinching back as if she were an apparition. She pointed a single, steady finger at a small, dust-covered panel on the side of the console, a panel with a series of physical dials and a small, antiquated-looking port. "Give me access to the analog telemetry feed," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the noise of the tent with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was a voice that did not request. It commanded. The sergeant stared at her, then at Evans, confused. Evans stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are? You touch that equipment, and I'll have you arrested for interfering with a federal operation." For the first time, she turned her head and met his gaze. Her winter sky eyes were cold, clear, and utterly devoid of fear. "You have 8 minutes, Captain," she stated, not as a threat, but as a simple, undeniable fact. Then she turned back to the sergeant. The feed. Now, something in her tone, some deep, resonant frequency of absolute authority, broke through the young man's training. He fumbled for a moment, then plugged a coiled black cable into the dusty port. A new window, filled with cascading raw data, appeared on a secondary monitor. It was a chaotic stream of numbers: wind speed, altitude, barometric pressure, GPS coordinates. To the others, it was gibberish. To her, it was a language she knew intimately. She pulled an old, worn leather-bound notebook and a simple pen from her pants pocket. Her hands, which a moment ago seemed unremarkable, were now a study in practiced efficiency. They moved with a fluid grace, a testament to decades of repetition. Her fingers flew, scribbling equations on the page, her eyes darting between the data stream and her notebook. She wasn't just doing math. She was performing an act of pure, distilled competence. She muttered variables under her breath. Crosswind at altitude, 17 knots. Target velocity, 40 kilometers per hour. Vector, 275. Terminal spin drift, 0.03 mils. The soldiers around her watched, mesmerized. The frantic energy of the tent had been replaced by a stunned, reverent silence. They were witnessing something that felt impossible, like watching a master artisan build a clock by hand in the middle of a hurricane. After a few agonizingly long minutes, she stopped writing. She looked at the final number on her page. Without a word, she reached past the stunned sergeant and typed a long string of coordinates into a manual input field on the main console. A single line appeared. Manual firing solution uploaded. She then looked at the artillery liaison officer. "Fire for effect," she said, her voice calm and steady. The officer, wide-eyed, looked at Captain Evans, who stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. Then he looked at the clock. 2 minutes left. He made a decision. He keyed his radio. All batteries. Fire for effect. A moment later, the main screen switched to a satellite view. A tiny speck, the artillery shell, streaked across the sky. It impacted not just in the target area, but directly on the roof of the moving target vehicle. A perfect, impossible shot. A wave of collective, disbelieving gasps swept through the tent, followed by a silence so profound it was deafening. Every eye turned to the woman, who was quietly putting her notebook and pen back in her pocket, her face as impassive as ever. Captain Evans could only manage 2 words, a choked whisper of pure shock. No way. Colonel Miller had seen enough. The moment she had begun her calculations, the ghost of a memory had solidified into a certainty that made the hairs on his arms stand up. He had seen those hands before, 20 years ago, scrawling notes on a map in a sand-blown command post in a place the world had forgotten, her calm a beacon in a storm of chaos. He strode down from the overlook, his boots crunching on the gravel with a heavy, purposeful rhythm that commanded attention. The soldiers, still reeling from the impossible shot, parted for him as he entered the command tent. His eyes, however, were not on them. They were fixed on the unassuming woman in the now mud-stained windbreaker. He walked past the frozen Captain Evans without a glance and stopped directly in front of her. His face, usually a stern mask of command, was a complex mixture of awe, reverence, and something that looked like relief. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, and in that look, a universe of shared history passed between them. Then, he turned to his aide, a young lieutenant who was staring at the woman with wide-eyed confusion. "Lieutenant," Colonel Miller's voice was low, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Give me the active duty and emeritus flag officer archives. Search for the primary architect of the Aegis Network Strategic Targeting Protocol." The lieutenant, confused but obedient, hurried to a secure terminal. "Sir, what's the name?" he asked. Colonel Miller's gaze never left the woman's face. "Reed," he said softly. "Evelyn." Reed, the name meant nothing to the younger soldiers. It was just a name. But for a few of the older non-commissioned officers on the periphery, a flicker of recognition, of disbelief, crossed their faces. It was a name spoken only in whispers, a name synonymous with a near-mythical era of strategic innovation. The name was a legend, a ghost story told to new recruits at the Signal Corps Academy. The lieutenant's fingers flew across the keyboard. After a few seconds, he stopped, his eyes widening in shock. He looked up at the colonel, then at the woman, then back at his screen. He was pale. "Sir, I have the file." But that can't be right. It lists her status as retired. The colonel's expression didn't change. He knew what the file said. He was simply making a point, drawing out the moment for maximum impact, ensuring the lesson that was about to be delivered would be seared into the memory of every person present. The entire tent was holding its breath. Captain Evans looked as if he was about to be physically ill. The world had tilted on its axis, and he was sliding off the edge. He was beginning to understand that the hole he had dug for himself was not a shallow trench, but a grave. The young lieutenant, his voice trembling slightly, began to read from the screen. The words fell into the stunned silence of the tent, like hammer blows on an anvil. General Evelyn Reed. 4-star. Last active command. Commander, United States Strategic Command. A tremor went through the crowd. 4-star. It was a rank so lofty, so rare, it was almost abstract. Most soldiers went their entire careers without ever seeing a 4-star general in person, let alone being in the same room. The lieutenant swallowed hard and continued, his voice gaining a tone of hushed awe. Primary architect of the Aegis Network Strategic Targeting Protocol, the very system we are currently testing. She literally wrote the book on it, sir. She designed the manual override. The irony was devastating, a physical force that seemed to suck the air from the room. The woman who Captain Evans had mocked as a lost old lady, the one he had accused of not understanding the complexity of their work, was the creator of that very complexity. The lieutenant's voice faltered as he scanned the next section. Decorations include the Defense Distinguished Service Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star with V4 Valor. The list went on, a litany of heroism and genius that painted a picture not of a simple woman, but of a titan, a foundational pillar of the modern military. Authored 17 technical manuals on advanced electronic warfare. Holds doctorates in applied mathematics and quantum physics from MIT. Mission classifications. The lieutenant stopped, his face paling further. Sir, the rest of her service record is sealed. Above top secret, the reveal was complete. The mystery of the unassuming woman was solved, replaced by a reality so staggering it was difficult to process. She was not just a soldier. She was a legend walking among them, a ghost from the Mount Olympus of the armed forces. Colonel Miller let the weight of the information settle. He then took one step forward, drew himself up to his full height, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his entire career. It was a gesture of absolute, unconditional respect, a formal acknowledgement from a subordinate to a superior officer. Protocol be damned. General Reed, he said, his voice thick with emotion, my apologies for the conduct of my officers. It is an honor to have you on my base, ma'am. He held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. After a moment of silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. At ease, Colonel, she said, her voice still quiet, still calm. Then, for the first time, a flicker of something, not quite a smile, but a deep, knowing warmth appeared in her eyes. It's just Evelyn now. The sound of Captain Evans' radio slipping from his numb fingers and clattering to the floor was the only sound that followed. The story of what happened in Command Tent Alpha spread through the base, not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It traveled first through the encrypted comms channels as stunned operators relayed the news to their counterparts in other sectors. Then it jumped to the mess halls, carried by the artillerymen who had fired the impossible shot. It was whispered in the maintenance bays and shouted in the barracks. The tale grew with each telling, acquiring the burnished patina of legend. They didn't just say she calculated the shot. They said she tasted the wind and divined the coordinates from the dust. They didn't just say she was a general. They said she was the ghost of the network, the machine's own spirit made flesh, come to check on her creation. The name Evelyn Reed became an incantation, a symbol of a deeper truth that every soldier, from the lowest private to the highest officer, intuitively understood. That competence was a quiet thing. It didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. Later that afternoon, a deeply humbled and visibly shaken Captain Evans found General Reed. She was sitting alone on a simple wooden bench near the perimeter fence, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. In his hands, he held her gray windbreaker. He had spent the last hour meticulously cleaning it, trying to scrub away the stain of his own arrogance along with the mud. He approached her cautiously, as one might approach a sleeping lion. He stopped a few feet away, his posture no longer proud and rigid, but stooped and deferential. "Ma'am," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "General, there are no words. My behavior was inexcusable. It was unprofessional, and it was disrespectful. I have no excuse. I am profoundly sorry." He held out the jacket. "I cleaned it as best I could." She turned her head slowly, her gaze calm and analytical. She looked at the jacket, then at the captain's face. She saw not the arrogant officer from that morning, but a man who had been stripped bare, a man confronted with the vastness of his own ignorance. She simply nodded and took the jacket from him. "Thank you, Captain," she said. Evans stood there, waiting for a reprimand, a lecture, an order for him to report to the colonel for disciplinary action. He was prepared for the end of his career, but it never came. Instead, she looked back toward the setting sun. "The system has a flaw, Captain," she said, her voice soft. "It's not the code. It's the users. They trust it too much. They've forgotten how to think without it. The most valuable weapon you have is the 6 inches between your ears. Don't ever let a machine do your thinking for you." That was all. It wasn't a rebuke. It was a lesson. The final, most important lesson of the day, delivered not with anger, but with the quiet grace of a master teacher. Evans could only nod, tears welling in his eyes. He finally understood. The legend of the Reed solution became a permanent part of the base's culture. The junior analyst who had been present in the tent, awestruck by the entire event, had discreetly saved a screenshot of the manual targeting data General Reed had entered. The string of raw coordinates and the resulting perfect hit confirmation became an image of almost religious significance. He printed it, framed it, and with Colonel Miller's quiet approval, hung it on the main wall of the operations center. Beneath it, a small brass plaque was installed. It didn't list her rank or her accomplishments. It just said, "Think." It became a touchstone, a point of reference for every soldier who worked in that room. New lieutenants were told the story of the day the network died, and a quiet civilian saved the mission with a pen and paper. They were shown the plaque and told to remember that technology was a tool, not a crutch. The lesson transformed Captain Evans. The brittle shell of his arrogance had been shattered, and in its place, something more resilient began to grow: humility. He stopped managing by intimidation and started leading by example. He requested a transfer to the training academy, where he became one of the most fervent advocates for teaching foundational skills. He was often seen mentoring young soldiers, both male and female, with a patience and respect that no one would have thought him capable of before that day. He would tell them the story of the muddy jacket, not as a point of shame, but as the defining moment of his career. The moment he learned that a person's worth is not measured by the rank on their collar or the volume of their voice, but by the quiet competence of their actions. General Reed, for her part, deflected any and all praise. She met with Colonel Miller for a quiet cup of coffee before she left the base the next morning, her departure as unassuming as her arrival. They spoke of old times, of fallen comrades, and of the future of the force they had both dedicated their lives to. As she was leaving, Miller made a gesture toward the operations center. "You know, they're calling it the Reed solution," he said with a smile. "Your name is going to be a legend around here for a long, long time." She simply shrugged, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Just remind them to check the antenna, tensioning now, and then, Mike," she said. "Legends don't stop physics." With that, she got into a plain sedan and drove away, leaving behind not a legacy of fame, but a legacy of profound, institutional change, planted like a seed in the mind of every soldier who had witnessed her silent masterclass. The jacket, clean and unadorned, sat on the passenger seat beside her, a simple piece of cloth that had, for a brief, pivotal moment, become a symbol of one of the military's most enduring truths. Months later, the ripple effects of that single afternoon continued to spread. Colonel Miller, in his quarterly address to the base's entire officer corps, stood before a packed auditorium. Instead of his usual presentation filled with charts and strategic objectives, he simply projected the framed image of the manual targeting data onto the massive screen behind him. He let the image hang in the silence for a full minute before he spoke. Some of you were there for this. He began, his voice resonating with quiet authority. The rest of you have heard the story. I want you to look at this. This is not a data string. It is a philosophy. It is a reminder that the most advanced weapon system in the world is worthless without the fundamental, unshakable competence of the human being operating it. He then told the story of General Evelyn Reed, not as a myth, but as a case study in leadership. He spoke of her calm in the face of chaos, her precision under pressure, and most importantly, her profound humility. He spoke of Captain Evans' mistake, not to shame him. Evans himself was sitting in the front row, listening intently, but to illustrate the danger of assumptions. We are an institution built on visual cues, Miller explained. Rank, uniform medals. We use them as shortcuts to determine respect. But that day, we were taught a powerful lesson. Respect is not owed because of a patch on a sleeve. It is earned through demonstrated excellence. General Reed did not demand your respect. She commanded it, simply by being the most competent person in the room, and she did it without raising her voice. The story became a mandatory part of the orientation for all new personnel assigned to the base. The plaque with the single word "think" was replicated in other critical command centers across the military. The Reed solution entered the lexicon not just as the name for a specific event, but as shorthand for any elegant, low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. It signified a return to first principles, a focus on the fundamentals that had been overshadowed by a generation of dazzling but fragile technology. The legacy of her visit wasn't a statue or a building named in her honor. It was something far more powerful and enduring. It was a change in mindset. It was a renewed emphasis on training, on mentorship, on the quiet, unglamorous work of becoming a true professional. It was the sight of a young lieutenant questioning a senior officer's assumption, not with arrogance, but with a respectful request for clarification and being listened to. It was a culture slowly, painstakingly learning to value substance over style. True legacy is not a monument you leave behind. It is a principle that moves forward. It is not etched in stone, but woven into the actions and decisions of those who come after. General Evelyn Reed's brief, unexpected visit did more to shape the next generation of leaders on that base than a dozen official training doctrines ever could. Her quiet competence became a living ideal, a standard against which they measured themselves and their peers. The story of the muddy jacket became a parable, a teaching tool passed down from one soldier to the next, a constant reminder that the person you underestimate today might be the giant whose shoulders you are standing on tomorrow. It taught them that arrogance is a shield for insecurity, while true confidence is silent, patient, and proven only through action. It reinforced the idea that the ultimate authority comes not from a title granted by an institution, but from a mastery earned through a lifetime of discipline, study, and sacrifice. The real uniform she wore that day was not one of cloth and metal, but one of profound, unshakable character. Years from now, when new crises arise and new technologies fail, there will be a generation of soldiers who, in a moment of panic, will look past the flickering screens and the blaring alarms. They will take a deep breath, quiet their minds, and remember the story of the woman who faced down chaos with a notebook, a pen, and a deep, abiding faith in the power of the human mind. They will remember to think. And in that moment, the quiet general's true work continues, her silent lesson echoing through time, a testament to the enduring power of a professional who let her actions speak for her, knowing they would be heard long after she was gone. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.